Hello and welcome to Book Lovers Companion, the podcast about books, authors, their crafts, and more. I'm your host, Edith, and joining me from Dallas, Texas, is journalist, TV producer, podcaster, and author Claire Saint-Amant. Hello, Claire, and welcome to Book Lovers Companion.
Thank you so much, Edith. Glad to be here.
It's absolutely splendid to have you on because I always wanted to know what's going on behind the scenes of TV shows, and yours was a scary one, a scary topic, true crime. And you've written a memoir, a book about your adventures, if I may say so, experiences of being a TV producer of a true crime TV show. And the book is called Killer Story. Claire, before we dive right in of the doings, the makings of TV producing, what can you tell our listeners about your memoir?
So this is a book that takes audiences where they've never gone before. It is behind the scenes, what happens to make the stories that we all enjoy watching about true crime cases. And so I'm taking you with me to the jail, to the courtroom, behind the scenes on the set before, we start rolling and what's going on, all these sidebar conversations, really the story behind the story. And so I think that people who love to watch true crime television, they'll never watch it the same way again once they read my book.
Probably not, no. And you, to be honest, you are brave because there were a few incidents where I thought, why did she do that? Good Lord. Why did she? Why did you?
I don't know a lot of the times. Looking back on it, I'm curious why I did them too. But I think a lot of times it was just caught up in the moment in pursuit of the story. And I wanted to find out where things were going to lead and if I was going to get, the information that I wanted. And so I ended up in some unexpected situations and, looking back on it, reflecting on it as I wrote the memoir, it was very cathartic for me. And it was a very interesting experience because I think for so many of us, we live our lives and things are happening all the time and we don't go back and reflect and really process what we did and why. And so writing the book, I learned a lot about myself too. And, you mentioned that I was brave and I ended up, that's my signature. Whenever I sign books, that's the inscription. I say, be brave. And I sign my name because I recognize that it takes a lot of courage to do my job, to be a true crime television producer. And, there's lots of examples where people need to be brave in all sorts of circumstances. And so I think it's good advice for any walk of life.
Absolutely. When we're talking about true crime that is happening or has happened only recently, so we're not talking about historic crime fiction, because reading or watching a story about Jack the Ripper is one thing, 100 years and more. It's the easy one because, okay, let's take a look at what he did and whatever. But in this case, these people are still very much alive, the perpetrators, the villains, if you will, the victims. It's their story you wanted to tell, isn't it? I mean, I got from the book that it's not always the case with the ones higher up in the food chain.
Right.
It's sometimes more for them about the sensation. But I got the impression that for you, it was always about the victim. What about those who suffered?
Yeah, it really resonates with me. Just the idea that they had no control when their loved one was taken, that this was a terrible injustice that was, perpetrated against them. And they've had to pick up the pieces of their life and figure out how to move on. And I want to give them the microphone as much as I can and give them back, any kind of control that I can provide in terms of them being able to tell their own story, them being able to offer what they believe is the most important thing to know about the case or about their loved one. And I really connected with so many of the victims and their families and wanted to honor the memory that they had of their loved one. And so I felt like by being respectful of them and giving them the chance to participate or not. I recognize that no one has to give me an interview, no one has to be on the show. It's always a choice. And so I wanted to give them that choice and respect their decision.
Hmm. Yeah, true. And what about those who committed the crimes? I sometimes, or I often, when I do watch true crime episodes on YouTube, for example, I get the impression that these people are far more interested in getting uh, in front of a camera than the the relatives of the victims, which is understandable for the relatives because there's so much pain, so much grief. And
Right.
on the other hand, those who did it, they just, I don't know, their celebrity status is confirmed when they are in front of a camera. Or did I get that wrong?
I think in their minds, a lot of times that is the case. And in the cases that I covered, the killers were typically these narcissistic sociopaths, psychopaths, where they believed that they were the most important person in every room, and they really thought that they were smart enough to get away with murder. And I think that's what made it so fascinating psychologically to talk to them. It was incredibly disturbing to hear their thoughts and their motivations and the lies that they would tell and the ways that they would misrepresent things. But it was also interesting to know how their minds worked. And so I certainly didn't want to glorify them or make them seem important in any kind of celebrity way. But the fact that they had done these terrible things and were willing to talk about them was interesting to me.
Do you think that, or were you ever afraid that you were catering to their need for popularity? Because you know what I mean is we have those, I don't know, 150,000 books about Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
Since we've mentioned him before. But there aren't so many books about his victims. We don't know that much about them. And it was kind of refreshing to read Haley Rubenhall's books, book The Five, where she's not interested in Jack the Ripper at all, but in the women.
Yeah.
Nobody ever talks about the victims or not enough about the victims. Do you think that is also true when we talk about true crime documentaries?
There is definitely a way to do it right and a way to do it wrong. And I think whenever we look at what the victims have gone through and we talk about what was lost and how they're able to still find joy in life, I have been so inspired by victims' families who have found peace, found happiness, found a new lease on life, even in the face of the worst thing that could have ever happened to them. And, we all have difficulties in our life. We all have unexpected events that happen to us. And it's a wonderful example to have people who are able to go through something that nobody would wish on anyone, but they still have lightness. They still have a zest for life, and it's a story about resilience. And I think that is so important to remember, that even when the worst thing happens to you, you can still pick up the pieces of your life and find like new meaning and purpose, and you can bring hope to lots of people. And that is something that I think gets lost if we're just sensationalizing the crime, if we're just talking about the killer and just going through like the gory details. Like, I really don't have an interest in that. Now, the psychology behind why people commit murder and what, ways that they try to get away with it, I think that's very interesting, from like an academic perspective and also instructionally, to try to understand red flags and who these kinds of people are and, ways that you can um, recognize this kind of behavior in your own relationships. If you see the manipulation, if you see the lies, if you see the narcissism. And I think that that can be helpful to recognize those types of traits and clues.
And what would be, in your estimation, the most common reason for murder? I mean, there are the three
Yeah,
classic ones: money, love, hate. Which of the three would you say is the most common one in the end?
sure. I would say it really comes down to greed.
Yeah.
I have
Okay.
seen it over and over again, and
Mhm.
it could be a jealousy that's involving love, and it could be involving money, but
Yeah.
mostly it's the idea that they think that murder will solve their problems. That if they could
Yeah.
just get this person out of their life, then everything would be okay. And it's never true. It's always, that they get a whole new set of problems. And it doesn't make anything better. It is the absolute worst decision that anyone can make, and I always wonder, does no one watch this show? Do they really think they're gonna get away with it? But they do, and it really is this idea in their minds where they think
Mm.
that they're the smartest person to have ever lived and that they will get away with it because no one thinks about the consequences. If they're really
Yeah.
thinking about the consequences and the likelihood of being caught, they wouldn't commit murder, but it's not a logical decision.
Yeah. Yeah. Probably not. No. I mean, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, unless
I
you're
mean,
talking about self-defense, unless you're talking about
yeah.
your
Yeah. Yeah.
life is
Yeah.
in danger, yeah,
Of
that's
course. Yeah.
different.
That's different. Absolutely. Absolutely agree. Because in the moment, if you are, like you said, in danger yourself or your family, I mean, it's
Right.
absolutely understandable. But nobody of us knows what we are capable of in such a case. What would we would do in such a case? I
I
absolutely
agree, I
understand
agree.
that. But your job was to get everything on camera and tell the story. Like it says, the title of your book, killer story or the story behind it. Let's leave out the killer for a moment. The story of the victims, the story of the crime itself. What happened? What was going on? What were the steps that were taken, and how did it come that the killer was found? And you also cover the trial, don't you? In your stories, the stories you tell also on television. Uh, what are, or for you as a producer, what were the steps to make it happen, to bring it on screen?
So it all starts with research and finding the right kind of case that can become an hour of television, and it's not every single murder case. It has to have certain elements, like, there has to be mystery. There has to be twists and turns, alternate suspects, red herrings, the idea that, you know, it's not that easy to solve. And there has to be a period of investigation and different steps that are taken. And then you want to have, hopefully, an arrest and a trial and a conviction. That's the kind of ideal scenario. And so, whenever I would find a case that I was interested in, I would look at it, from all angles and who could talk, who's available, who's willing to talk, who's talked before, and then looking at the court case and when is this coming up on the docket? When is this going to be in front of a judge? When could a jury potentially be called? And looking at all these different factors to see if, it's going to line up for us to be able to tell it. And then I would go out, I would meet people, I would wine and dine them, try to convince them to go on television. My specialty ended up being getting these interviews before the trial because I quickly learned that if you wait until the trial, everybody's going to show up. So I worked for CBS News 48 Hours. That was my show. And Dateline is on NBC and 2020 is on ABC, here in the US. And those are the big three shows. And so if you waited until the trial and it was a big enough case, all three networks would be there. And if you're just trying to introduce yourself to people and try to get them to do an interview, it's pretty overwhelming to do this at the trial. And so I'd done that a couple of times and I was like, I got to find a better way. And so I started talking to people much earlier and started building in the idea that I would want to interview them, and when would they be open to an interview, and could we do a pre-interview, and could we, do an interview before the trial. If we agreed, it wouldn't air until after the trial. And there were all sorts of ways to make people feel comfortable with it. We would make agreements that would allow us to film something but not air it until there was a conclusion of the trial. And so that provided the safety net, for people to talk to us, because that way they knew it wasn't going to air until after the trial, so it wouldn't affect legal proceedings. That was one way. Some people wanted to get their story out before the trial. It's, people call it the trial by media. And it's a strategy. And some attorneys and some suspects wanted to employ it. They wanted to take their shot pre-trial with the media. And so if they want to play ball that way, I had no problem bringing that to my bosses and saying they're willing to go on camera now, and we don't have to agree to hold the story. We can actually run it as soon as we're ready. So then we'd have to go through our legal department and, decide if we could take this to air before trial. Was there any, what risks were there? Could we do this? And a lot of times we did. We would air these pre-trial episodes, and I talk about them in the book. And it was a bit of a calculation. We had to consider a lot of different things. If you wait until the trial, everything becomes public record. Everything's out in the open. It's available to everyone, and there aren't as many landmines. But it also means that you're going against everybody and dealing with the same time frame. So,
and who is harder to convince to go on camera? Is it law enforcement? Is it the lawyers? Because sometimes I get the impression that lawyers also have a sort of narcissistic personality disorder.
Yeah.
In order to be that successful. What about judges? What about the families? Who is the hardest to get on camera? I suppose it's the family, isn't it? Maybe sometimes they are, maybe they're not.
Yeah, a lot of times it's the law enforcement and the judges who do not want to be on camera and talk. And many times they're legally barred from making that decision themselves based on the type of office that they hold. And they have to get other people to give them permission if it's even possible. So I would say, in my experience, those were the hardest ones to get on camera. Plenty of victims' families do not want to talk and never talk.
Yeah.
And that's just within their rights. And I never wanted to feel like I was pressuring a victim's family to talk. That was the hardest part of the job, was approaching them and having to have that conversation, and just knowing that they've already been through the worst thing that could ever happen. And now I'm asking them to talk about it on camera to a stranger. It's unimaginable, but I tried to approach it with as much sensitivity as possible and recognize that if it wasn't me doing it, it was going to be someone else. It's not like I could stop the true crime machine. So even though I didn't enjoy talking to victims' families, I mean, I enjoyed once we had a relationship and I could offer them comfort and I could learn from them and I could help understand their needs. I very much enjoyed that. But that initial approach and starting those conversations, that's the hardest part of the job. Absolutely. And I just always wanted them to feel that they were in control of whether or not they spoke, and it was their decision to make, not mine. And I was just offering them those options. And I found a lot of, comfort in the fact that they would choose to speak with me more often than not. And I wanted to respect them and make it as much as I could, a
Yeah.
pleasant experience. Just whatever I could do to try to ease their pain was important to me.
Mm. And what about the judges and being comfortable with, the press in their courtroom? Because there was this one incident where you were in the back of the courtroom and the judge didn't realize you were a member of the press. And then some information got online and the judge was a bit put out. Let's put it that way.
Yes. Yes, that was a very uncomfortable situation to be in, and it was actually my first trial, and it was a civil trial about sexual assault of a child that had occurred at a elite private school in Dallas. And the judge was completely shocked to learn that a member of the media was in the courtroom, and I was actually live blogging the trial because no one told me I couldn't. And I had called the courtroom and said I was a journalist, I wanted to cover this trial, were there anything I needed to know? And the person I spoke to told me that I was just a member of the public like anybody else. I wasn't, just because I was a journalist, there weren't any special rules for me. So I took that information down and I went and did my job in the courtroom. And it was uh, as big of a surprise to me as anyone that I wasn't allowed to do what I was doing based on the rules that the judge had established, but not shared with me. And so that's something that people might not realize, is that judges have a lot of latitude in their own courtroom. They can allow people to take notes or not. They can allow people to chew gum or not. They can enforce a dress code. There's all sorts of things that they can do. And so I didn't know that she didn't want me to live blog. I didn't know that that was a problem. I saw other people on their cell phones. Well, turns out they were all attorneys. So it was very uncomfortable situation, but it all worked out in the end.
Yeah, you were not playing Angry Bird.
No, no, she thought I was playing games. She said I was a legal law firm intern, right? And I
Yeah.
was playing Angry Birds on my phone. I was like, I don't even have games on my phone, Judge. I'm just trying to do my job.
Yeah. And okay, the press in the courtroom as an observer is one thing, okay? But you also mentioned that it is sometimes possible to have cameras not cameras put there by the judges, by the system, but by the press themselves. So how hard is it to get? You said they have a lot of wiggling room, the judges, in their own courtroom. So what makes it possible for you as a producer to put a camera in a courtroom? How would you go about that? How would you do that?
So it's a request that I would make to the judge ahead of the trial and as far in advance as I possibly could to try to give them time to think about it. But I would ask to be allowed to film the proceedings and to use them for our television program. And I would talk about how the courts in America are open to the public and what a wonderful thing that is. And we consider our show an extension of the public view. And so not everyone might be able to get off work and come to this trial, but they have a right to see it. And so our cameras allow that, and they make it truly public. And so judges have a lot of feelings about cameras in the courtroom, the idea that it might create a media circus, that it might distract from the actual business of the court. And then there are privacy concerns if certain witnesses are minors, for example, or victims of sexual crimes. They have a right to privacy. And the jury themselves has a right to privacy and to not be photographed. So we would always have to look at all the special circumstances and look at the angles of the cameras and make sure that we weren't showing the jury members' faces. So there were a lot of considerations that we would make. And in my experience, it was more often than not granted that they would allow cameras in the courtroom, but it was not a guarantee. And there were certain counties where they never allowed them. And I had to just take notes. Sometimes they wouldn't even allow laptops, and I had to take notes by hand which is very taxing. And I had to develop my own shorthand, to make sure I could try to get as much of the testimony as possible. Of course, there's a court reporter, but those transcripts are extremely expensive. And even network television doesn't want to pay for the official transcripts, and you have to wait so long to get them. They're not available like at the end of the day. They're available at the end of the trial months later. So having a producer take notes is a much better avenue.
Mm. I mean, I get the impression that, at least it's true for the United States, that these procedures have a large audience. True crime has a large audience. Do you think that fictional shows played a part in making, on the other hand, true crime so popular?
I do. I think that shows like Law and Order and other true
Mm,
crime docuseries, they've come out and they've really whet people's appetite for more
mm,
and more true crime stories. And like CSI is a big one. And in all the cases that I covered, if I was there for jury selection, the attorneys would always talk about how this isn't like CSI. We're not going to have the whole murder on video,
yeah,
right? We're not going to have every piece of evidence that you wish
yeah.
existed. Some cases, they have no DNA, they have no fingerprints, and it's all circumstantial, and they have to find ways to connect the dots. And it's really interesting to look at the difference between
Mm,
what's fiction and what's real life in the crime space, but there are a lot of parallels. I can definitely see
okay.
how a lot of the shows have been influenced by real life crimes. And
Mm-hmm.
it sometimes, we like to say that the truth is stranger than fiction in true crime television. The idea that what really happened is often more interesting than something anyone could come up with.
Yes, isn't it? I often wonder
Yeah.
that myself when I read crime fiction, not non-fiction, and then you open up the newspaper and you think, no one would ever believe it if you put it in a book.
Absolutely. I think so too. And that's one of the reasons I wrote the book is I thought nobody would believe what it
Yeah,
really takes to create an hour of true crime television and
yeah,
the unbelievable circumstances that producers get themselves into. I opened the book and I've been snuck into jail by a defense attorney in a capital murder case. And I truly cannot believe that I'm in this
yeah,
situation.
yeah,
And I don't it was not something I tried to orchestrate. I wasn't a puppet master trying to sneak it. It just sort of happened. I kept
yeah.
saying yes to things, and the next thing I knew, I was behind bars and nobody knew that I was a member of the media. They assumed that I was an attorney, although I never told anyone I was an attorney. So, it was interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And also the fact with the USB drive.
Yes.
I mean, seriously, what's wrong with those people? Because they screwed up and
Right.
somebody has to take the blame, has to take the fall for them.
Yeah, it was a really interesting situation. I was accused of felony
Yeah.
evidence tampering in another capital murder trial in Travis County, Austin, Texas. And it was a really unexpected window into the world of a wrongful investigation into a being falsely accused of something. And I couldn't believe how zealous law enforcement was in trying to pin this crime on me because they had lost a flash drive with all the evidence in the case. And I had been in the courtroom with a camera crew. And so they believed that we had stolen it. And there was nothing we could do to convince them that we didn't steal something. It's really hard to prove you didn't do something when they don't have the actual item, and so they can't say where it is or where it isn't. And it was just this really frustrating and terrifying experience because I was being accused of a felony, which is a very serious crime, and I felt like there was nothing I could do. I had to wait for my attorney to, work through the legal process, and it was really terrifying.
Yes, it was terrifying to read.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
one
I'm
can't.
glad that came through, Edith. I'm glad it came
Yes,
through.
I mean, one can't even imagine. I mean, how would one react if it happens to you?
It's
You know?
very surreal, and yeah,
Yeah,
you're just kind of left there slack-jawed because you
yeah,
feel like you can only defend yourself so much, and they don't believe you, and everything
yeah,
they say, they're
exactly.
trying to
Yeah.
twist. And at the end of the day, what saved me in that case was
Mhm.
not talking, refusing to go make a statement, and waiting for my attorney to work the back channels, and
Yeah.
eventually they dropped their investigation. And to this day, I don't know if they think that I did it or not, but I no longer have to try to prove that I didn't do something. They
Mm.
eventually I won't spoil it for the readers, but it's the first story that I wrote for the book when I'm snuck into jail, and then the next thing that I wrote when I was developing this
Yeah,
manuscript
yeah.
was the flash drive story when I was accused of stealing the evidence. And I had those 2 chapters, and they occurred many years apart, maybe 5
Mhm.
years apart, but I wrote those 2 and I sent them to some writer friends, and I was like, "Do you think I can make a book out of these 2 things? Like, I have a lot of other stories. These are the most extreme."
Yeah.
And, the reaction, the feedback that I got was, "Oh, yeah, you can make a book out of this. This is nuts. This really happened to you?" And so I felt like with those as kind of my anchor points, I could go back and
Yeah.
tell a
Yeah.
lot of stories.
And I suppose it does only work with nonfiction because, like I said, in fiction, everyone would say, "Oh, come on,
It's
that's
true.
pss,
Yeah.
pss."
They would think I wrote it too
Yes.
ridiculously.
Yeah.
That no
Yeah.
way, they're not gonna tail you, they're not gonna put investigators following
Yeah.
you around Austin. Well, they did.
Yeah.
They're not gonna have a retired detective call you and, "Yep, that happened," a
Yeah.
friend who used to work for the department. It was unbelievable.
Yeah. Real life. Far
Yeah,
scarier than anything a fiction author can ever come up with,
I
isn't
think so.
it? Yeah.
Yes.
You had a lot of work to do for the shows you produced, but you also had a lot of work to do to establish yourself in your network station. You had to fight against the powers that be, make them interested in what you had to offer. In the end, or looking back again, what was more stressful? Getting everything together for 1 hour of television or fighting against those who should have your back?
I think fighting against people who should have my back was more stressful. It really was hard to believe that I had to
Mhm.
fight that hard to get stories on the air and to get
Yeah.
them told in the way that I felt like was the best way.
Mhm.
And that was the biggest challenge and the part of the job that I think a lot of people don't realize exists
Mhm.
unless you're in the industry. You don't
Mhm.
know that you have to fight within your own show, within your own newsroom to get stories told and to get the resources to tell them. But that's a big part of the job. You have to be an advocate for these stories. And I always felt like the stories that I found and that I wanted to tell,
Mhm.
that it was, real responsibility to get them
Mhm.
on the air. And I wanted to be sure that I did everything I could to get this story out there.
Mhm.
And sometimes it was more than I bargained for. I
Mhm.
I didn't always, realize how much I was sticking my neck out on the line to get these
Yeah.
stories made. But at the end of the day, I'm really proud that I took those risks and got those stories on the air.
Mhm. And having experienced all those cases and those different personalities, what would you say, looking back upon it, who was for you the scariest person you have ever met in your line of work? And who was the most uplifting person you have met in your line of work?
So I would say the scariest person I met was a serial killer named Eric Williams. And he was a former justice of the peace who really went to the dark side. and gave into revenge fantasies that he had for people who he believed had wronged him in his career as a justice of the peace, which is like a low-level judge in these smaller counties. And so he ended up murdering a prosecutor and the district attorney and his wife in cold blood, and had planned the whole thing out meticulously, had getaway cars, had a storage unit, had all sorts of clothing to hide his face and shoes and things that were too big to hide the size of his body. I mean, he really thought of everything, and that's what's so disturbing. And being face to face with him and interviewing him about the case and trying to convince him to go on camera was absolutely terrifying. And just looking into his eyes and the darkness that was staring back at me, I'll never forget it.
Mhm. And the most uplifting person you met in all these horrible scenarios, stories you've encountered?
So the most uplifting person would be Judge Julie Kosurik. And she survived an assassination attempt in her own driveway in front of her 15-year-old son. And so she is just an incredible human being. And she has this wonderful attitude about how every day is a gift and how much she appreciates her life and the people in it, and that she gets to continue to do her work and to have her family around her. I remember she was in the ICU suffering from a gunshot wound to the head, and she filed for re-election as a judge. She said, "You cannot intimidate us. You cannot eliminate us. Like, we will keep fighting." And I was so impressed by her, and I just am honored to have been able to meet her, to interview her, to get her to be on 48 Hours, telling her story. And yeah, she's definitely one of my personal heroes and someone I think about, pretty regularly, just because of what an incredible example she is of being tough and fighting through adversity. She's had like 30 surgeries. She lost a finger. She has been through the ringer in so many ways. And so, yeah, I think if she can continue to do her job and live her life, then I can get through anything, right? It's very inspiring.
Mm. Yeah, I also got that from your book, the way you described her and what happened to her. Yeah, absolutely. Now I have this proposal for you. Does every story have to end in a trial to make it on TV?
So it does not. It is much
Okay.
easier. It's much cleaner. But I've been able to tell a couple of stories that didn't have a trial. I told one unsolved story
Mm-hmm.
when I worked at 48 Hours, and it was the
Okay.
unsolved murder of Jennifer Harris, which I also
Yeah.
feature on my podcast. So
Yeah.
it's a case that I hope one day will be solved.
Okay. The story is the following. It's a true story. There is this woman who wants to get divorced, and all the proceedings were going ahead, and she leaves her home, the apartment, the flat she shares with her husband, to stay with her parents. Now, her divorce lawyer says to her, that's not such a good idea, in front of a judge. It wouldn't look so good if you've left him, blah, blah, blah. You should move back in with your husband. Okay, she does that. And then neither her brother nor her parents hear from her. They're wondering what's going on, what happened to her. And her husband said, yeah, she left.
Oh,
She up and left. And the police was wondering, how is that possible? Her clothes are still there, her passport is still there, her jewelry is still there. She said not a single word to anyone. And neither the brother nor the parents believed what he said. And the police was interrogating him again and again. And they were very sure that he murdered her, although there was no body, you know? There was no real evidence except, like I said, no clothes were missing whatsoever.
Right.
and they were coming for him for the last time. And that's when they found him hanged. He hanged
Oh,
himself. He murdered himself, committed suicide. And I think it was a few weeks later, they found her body.
oh gosh. That's
They
such a
were,
sad story. Yeah,
yeah,
it's
yes,
really,
it
yeah.
is. It happened to the cousin of my father's.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And her name was also Edith.
Mm.
And that's a true crime story. And they found her. He strangled her. He put her in a suitcase. He stabbed her, and then he threw her into the river.
Oh, wow.
And a few weeks later, they found the suitcase with her body, and they could only identify her by the rings she wore and so on.
Mm. Yeah, that's terrible. The use of the suitcase stands out just because I've seen that in other cases. They'll use suitcases, golf bags,
Mm.
Rubbermaid storage bins, trying to get the body out of the home or a hotel, wherever it might be. And yeah, I mean, it's just such a tragedy. And to think, could have just gotten a divorce.
Yes, he didn't
They could
want
both still
anybody
be alive.
else. Yes, he didn't want anybody else to have her. And the thing is, he was the quiet type. That's why I always say, you should be aware not only about the loud ones, because the loud ones you can judge what's going to happen. It's the quiet ones you have to be aware of.
It's like we were talking about earlier, that greed. He didn't want anyone else to have her. The
Yes,
jealousy,
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
possessiveness. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm asking you that, and I'm telling you that, would a story like that make it? Would it be interesting for true crime TV?
So probably not,
Okay.
because he killed himself.
Yeah.
And so people want to see the killer
Mhm.
punished,
Mm.
and he basically punished himself by committing suicide, but it's not as satisfying for the viewer to have
Mm.
that ending. Even if there's not a trial, maybe it's a plea deal or whatever it might be, they want to see that person continuing to pay for what they did. And so, in my mind, there's a pretty big stumbling block to
Mm.
this being a true crime television show for that reason. But it could potentially work because you have the mystery of her.
Yeah.
Where is she? And then the
Yeah.
body turns up. But him committing suicide, basically, especially before her body's found,
Yeah.
basically makes it so that he's already out of the picture. And then they find her body. It kind of
Yeah.
takes the tension out of it, as
Mm.
strange as that might be to say. But yeah, it's a tough one for television when you're thinking about how do you keep your audience
Mm.
engaged in
Mm.
this, and
Yeah.
then how do they feel the closure and the
Yeah.
resolution when everyone has died. So yeah.
Yeah. It was strange in a way, when it happened. I mean, I was 5 years old,
Yeah.
and I mean, my aunt and my uncle, they were devastated. Also, her brother, they were devastated.
Oh yeah.
Everyone was, and I mean, at least they had closure. They had a grave they could visit. They knew what happened to
Yeah.
her, and
It's
it's
true.
not unsolved in a way. So many cases are where they can't go to a grave, or
Yeah.
don't know what really happened.
Those cases are the ones that just devastate me. The
Yeah,
idea that they're still looking for their loved
yeah,
one. They don't know if they're where they are. And, people can get declared dead after, I think it's 5
yeah,
years, at least here in the
yeah,
States. But that's not enough. And
yeah.
it doesn't really provide, it's not the same thing as getting to actually bring them home. And then
Mm,
you hear about these miracle cases where they find them alive and they've survived, and it keeps that hope alive, which is something, but it's
mm,
so I just can't imagine being in that limbo. That would
Mm,
be the worst torture. And
mm,
for families that are still going through that, it's just heartbreaking. It's actually why I started this new podcast called
mhm,
Justice Pending, where I talk
mhm.
about cases that are unresolved, where
Okay.
people are
Yeah,
still
yeah.
looking for answers and try to bring them back into the public eye to see, is there anything else that can be done? Are there other
Mhm,
investigative steps? Are there witnesses? Do people know
mhm,
something?
mhm.
Can they come forward?
Yeah,
And by doing that, people have started to reach out to me about cases that they know in their families and their circles and their communities to tell me about these unsolved, unresolved crimes. And it's incredible how many people have been touched by crime.
and what about solving those cases? Was there at least, or is there a shred of hope that you can be really helpful? Has been solved any case?
So I just started the podcast this year.
Okay.
So and it's still early days,
Mhm.
but I
Okay.
hope
Yep.
that there will be movement
Mhm.
in some of these cases. There's
Mhm.
always the idea that, these cold cases, they have
Mhm.
detectives
Mhm.
assigned to them and they get new detectives
Yeah.
assigned and they get new DNA testing available and
Yeah.
there's advances in technology
Mhm.
that can do
Mhm.
amazing things. So keeping these cases in the conversation, I see that as part of my journalistic mission, not to
Yeah.
forget about the unsolved cases, because the cases that get solved in a week or a month or a year, those are the ones that everyone wants to talk about. But the cases that remain unsolved, that stay in the cold case file, those are
Mm.
the ones that intrigue me and break my heart. And I want to see, justice for Jennifer Harris. I want to see
Yeah.
these cases solved that have a lot of promise, but don't have the ending that they deserve.
Mhm. And what about the serial killer you mentioned in your book, Samuel Little? Uh, he said he killed more than 90 women.
Yes.
How many of them were really found, and how many are still a question mark? And is that not something that also is rather unsettling to think there are still families out there who don't know, is
Oh,
or was
absolutely.
my daughter a victim of this man or not?
Yes, definitely. So there have been over 60 matches to victims, unknown Jane Does at the time, who've been identified, and those cases have been cleared. There are still about 30 cases, maybe a little
Mm,
less, that are being worked that need identification. And of course, it's been made more difficult by the fact that Samuel Little died.
yeah.
I believe it was 2022, maybe, when he died.
Okay.
And so that, there were a lot of interviews done and recordings and lots of information gathered, but it does eliminate the ability to go
Mhm.
back and ask more questions. But investigators have done just an incredible job to match up victims in that case and to provide families with answers, in
Yeah.
some cases 20-30 years in the making.
Mm,
So that's
mm,
a really fascinating case, and of course horrifying to think of this guy crisscrossing the country and killing people and getting away with it for so long. But the idea that the scope of his crimes was finally known and that we have names, dates, drawings, details of
yeah.
so many victims that were previously unknown is encouraging. The
Mm,
idea that, there's still more work to do, it's definitely something that we have to remember, that that's not finished, but there has been so much progress
yeah.
in solving those cases.
Yeah. And may I ask, Claire, is there a case that not only happened in the United States or Texas, but happened internationally that you would have loved to cover?
So I've always been really interested in the Natalie Holloway case.
Mhm.
She was I want to say high school student who
Mhm.
disappeared on a vacation in Aruba. And it took so many years for her killer to be brought to justice.
Okay.
But that case was in an international case that really fascinated me I think I was around her age. So, a teenager when it happened, and it really got in my head as a just an unbelievable story, and just the idea that her family didn't know who had killed her, and she was on this vacation, and it was supposed to be a carefree time, and eventually there was an arrest. It was Jordan Vandersloot has been arrested for that crime, but it took many years, and that was one that I definitely remember from an international international occurrence.
Okay. Have you heard about the Jack Unterweger case ever?
I don't think that I have.
He was a killer from Austria, and
Ooh.
yes, he killed prostitutes, and he started writing poetry in prison, and they named him the prison poet.
Oh, wow.
And people from, let's put it that way, from the Austrian cultural circle, they were very keen on getting him out of prison, because prison sentence, lifelong prison sentence in Austria means 20 to 25 years.
Oh, wow.
And they wanted to release him early because, he was reformed and he was writing poetry, blah, blah, blah. And he came free and he went to the United States.
Oh, my gosh.
And he killed prostitutes there as well. But law enforcement caught him and they brought him back to Austria because he had also killed women there again, in Austria again. They brought him back, and I think it was before his trial, he also committed suicide.
Oh, my goodness. Ugh, that's terrible.
Yes. Yeah.
I can't believe they let him out and he killed again. That's really awful.
Yeah. He was a poet, therefore, these days.
Wow.
I mean, he left Austria and he went on a killing spree, more or less. I don't know how many prostitutes he killed in the United States. 2 at least, I think.
Goodness.
Why? Why did you let him out?
Yeah.
I mean, well, yeah. I don't know. I mean, that was one of the sensational killers and the most horrible one. Well, he wasn't a killer, but you probably heard of him, Josef Fritzl, the man who imprisoned his own daughter and had children with her.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Terrible.
Yep.
People are really sick, That's disturbing.
Oh, yes. And nobody knew. Not even his own wife, which I don't believe, to be quite honest. She knew enough to know she didn't want to know more. Let's put it that way. Yeah, so, yeah. I mean, it's incredible what we humans are capable of, isn't it? And not in a good way.
It is. Yeah, no, it's very disturbing. And I think it makes you appreciate the good people that you do have in your life even more, to recognize, that not everyone's like that.
Yes, thank goodness for that. Oof,
right.
Absolutely. Claire, may I ask you, what are your plans for the near future? What can you tell us about that?
Well, I'm actually working on a new true crime show right now, looking at the methods of interview and interrogation with serial killers and how they're caught and how they end up confessing to their crimes. So that's an interesting project that I have in development right now. And I'm going around and talking about my book, Killer Story, The Truth Behind True Crime Television, and really enjoying getting to meet people who are reading the book and talking to book clubs and podcasters and everyone who's interested in true crime television. So I'm grateful for this opportunity to talk to you, Edith.
It was an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you for making time for me.
Yes, I'm so glad we could do it.
Thank you for being here. Please wait for me in the green room. I will be with you shortly.
Okay, great.
Oops. Dear listeners, I do hope you enjoyed this episode as much as my guest and I did. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I do hope you will tune in for another episode. Until next time.